Hello, I'm Keith Johnston, your host for Forrester's podcast, What It Means, where we explore the latest market dynamics impacting executives and their customers. Today, we're joined by Vice President and Principal Analyst Jay Patisol and Principal Analyst Kelsey Chickering to discuss the rise of creative commerce. Welcome, Jay and Kelsey.
Thanks, Keith. Great to be here.
Thank you so much. Excited to do this.
I'm really excited for this conversation because this is research that we're going to roll out an entire track at CX North America in just a couple of weeks. Commerce has traditionally been an isolated moment of purchase, cordoned off from the larger, dare I say, more creative part of the brand experience, or it's been the call to action at the end of a campaign. But new technologies seem to be enabling creative commerce, which you've coined here, Jay, which reinfuses the moment of purchase, the experience that supports it, and then the repurchase opportunity to engage in the larger customer experience. Before we get kicked off too far, Jay, can you just frame what do you mean by creative commerce and where did that come from?
Yeah, absolutely, Keith. It's a tricky one. When we say creative commerce, we're talking about a connected experience that connects the discovery and the marketing phase with the actual purchase phase, and then the ownership. In doing so with a series of insights and tactics that create a more fluid and evocative experience for customers. Now, where it started is really interesting. It started as a much more narrow piece of research. After the pandemic and during the pandemic, we were noticing that a lot of commerce executions looked very similar. A lot of the basket activity was looking similar. A lot of the digital experience for ordering looked similar. So I'll give you an example. When you went to buy curbside pickup for groceries at retail, at whatever situation you could think of, that experience of starting a transaction online, filling up your cart, starting the checkout process, getting in your car, driving to the location, parking in a specific space, finishing the transaction online, and having the goods brought out to your trunk, that could happen at any number of national retailers. And the brand itself almost kind of disappeared in just the mental, the muscle memory of a very similar experience took over. We saw that in restaurant, we saw that in retail, we saw that in numerous categories. And it really got us to thinking about how we might be able to better optimize that commerce experience in a more creative and distinct way. And along the way of beginning that research, we discovered that the process itself, as you said in the setup, Keith, is very disconnected. It's very isolated. Everything from a marketing standpoint and from an e-commerce standpoint is all optimized around the point of purchase. And there's very little consideration given to what happens before the purchase and what happens after the purchase. And we saw this opportunity to connect this experience together and create what we call a more creative approach to commerce.
Very cool. And I'm going to come to you, Kelsey, because one of the things that started exciting me about this research is because as I started talking about campaigns where literally like you develop a really creative media plan and then the call to action was the time to go purchase something, we're starting to see a lot more transactable ads, really rich creative media executions where like you're really in the moment, you're in the campaign and you're able to click to buy. Talk a little bit about that because that's a huge part of this idea of creative commerce.
Sure. Yeah. So when we think about like commerce media, I think there's a lot of conflation with retail media, that all commerce media is retail media, but I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot more to it. You have things that are like great experiences happening on publishers. You have interesting ad units popping up within social commerce. There's a lot of like new ways that convergence is happening. I mean, I think on the publisher side, that bringing together of brand and performance is so apparent. You look at something like Goop, for instance, it's Gwyneth Paltrow's editorial site, but it's also very much a shoppable site. And you're reading editorial content that would typically be, very brand type content, and you're seamlessly buying products as you're participating within that. So I think from that side, there's some interesting stuff happening. And then certainly with the new fronts this year, there was a lot of introduction of new types of shoppable experiences. You had, Meta in the past, they were scaling back some of their in-stream shopping on Instagram just because they weren't seeing traction. But they've reintroduced new ideas. So they have these shoppable AR reels where creators can, use augmented reality and make the shopping experience more immersive and interesting. So like Sephora was testing this, for instance, and the users could, press their thumb on the screen. They could get a filter with an aura that basically told them which perfumes they should buy. So it's just an example of how you're bringing in some more like immersive experiences into that, into the creative that you're seeing on social media.
Could I add to that I mean, what Kelsey said is so important, and I think it relates to, your comment about brand and performance and how those now interact. And in the past, of course, they were separate tactics and separate budgets and separate channels, and that really comes to bear in this disconnected commerce environment, particularly on the upfront, where what you're seeing and experiencing has very little to do with what you're actually purchasing or buying in some respects, or the experiences are so different. But yet we're in this world where, like, literally you can go onto Amazon, or your Goop example was a great example, but you can go onto Amazon and you can be looking for something and then purchase it, like, all within a 3-second window. The entire marketing experience happens there, and it represents this flattening of what we used to think of as the purchase funnel. And I know that Brandon Purcell is going to be talking to us about that at CX North America as one of his keynotes. But it's such an important piece to this, because it really it begins the disconnection that we're identifying, and so starting to kind of reconcile with this new, like, nonlinear, chaotic customer experience in marketing, I think is the starting place for trying to create a better commerce experience.
You just made me think, though, it's interesting with that flattening that you're talking about, and with this convergence of brand and performance coming together, that also means that we probably need to change our expectations for every piece of content. Just because it's commerce enabled doesn't mean that on the first time you're seeing that piece of content, you're going to buy. Like, a lot of people say social commerce has been failing. There hasn't been, like, I mean, I wrote about this over the holidays that, no one is shopping on social media, and it's not working. But working it doesn't mean that you're shopping right in the moment, but you're certainly getting more exposure to content. You're seeing new products, and you might then go off and buy that product later, or you're targeted a few more times, and then you purchase it. I just think that flattening also means that a piece of content can do many different things for your communications plan, and we need to be reasonable about how we measure and determine success of each piece.
So a lot of this stuff, just doesn't work unless the light bulb at the brand goes off and they realize that they need to be more experiential in how they transact with their customer. But also a lot of this is because there's, for those brands, those departments, those functions, they're working a lot, better together. But then for others, a lot of this is coming together because their partners have spun up new capabilities. They're starting to really look at how we connect our media and our commerce and the experiences together. Jay, do you have some examples? And you cover the agency sector really deeply of those agencies who are working with those brands that are really looking at this from a creative commerce perspective.
Yeah, several examples, and I think the common denominator here is that in the partner landscape, the more quote unquote real estate that the partner has, let's just say visibility to, or access to, the better enabled they are to provide a more kind of holistic experience. And so I'll give you an example of this. We found this wonderful story in LATAM Airlines. And LATAM Airlines, of course, is a carrier that operates out of Brazil and Chile and in other parts of the region. And they work with a specific agency partner, MRM, and MRM has a tremendous amount of responsibility with this client, including the creative and content development. They have some media responsibility as well as Martech and a series of digital channels. Part of the reason for this is where they operate in Latin America. There is a law that specifies, particularly in Brazil, that creative and media can't be separate. That agencies that buy media must also create media, and it's a phenomenon for that part of the world. But as a result, you see more integrated relationships. And in the instance of this LATAM Airlines example, what they found was that this event that we all know is Cyber Monday is this amazing e-commerce event, but due to the currency and the access to goods, that the cost of a number of the hundreds of popular items that are for sale on Cyber Monday actually cost less when you purchase it in another country, having actually flown there on LATAM Airlines. So literally the cost of buying an Xbox in Miami plus the ticket to fly to Miami is less than what it would cost you. I'm making that particular example up, is less than what it would cost you to purchase it in Chile, for example. So they developed this really sophisticated campaign using data signals, using their MarTech capabilities, using their performance and targeted marketing capabilities, their creative and content capabilities to demonstrate. They pulled in APIs and pulled in data feeds, and they would demonstrate to shoppers that it literally in calculation inside the ad unit that the cost of what they are looking to purchase would cost them less if they bought a ticket, flew to another city, had a layover, did some shopping, got back on the flight, and came home. And so they used really interesting tactics to do that. Search and SEO was a huge piece of it. So they would interrupt, place messages that would interrupt people while they were looking for goods, and run campaigns that showed them you can buy this cheaper in Miami. You can buy this cheaper in New Orleans, or whatever the destination would be. Miami tended to be one of the larger hubs just because it's LATAM Airlines, and it's a wonderful illustration of integration because it involved the purchase of an airline ticket, the purchase of the durable good that they were looking for, right? Including really highly targeted marketing and content marketing and smart SEO, and social played a part in it too, because you could publish on social what you purchased or what you intended to do, and it was a very sophisticated campaign, and it could only be executed with the partner having visibility across all those channels and responsibilities, beyond just the advertising component of it. And so that's a wonderful example of how partners and brands can work together to create alignment across sales, across tech, across marketing, and across CX, and create this experience that's much more kind of robust and connected, as opposed to these isolated purchase moments that we're talking about.
So, Kelsey, maybe we will talk a little bit about some creative commerce experiences that may be a little bit more isolated, but certainly brand rich in the entertainment to consumer space, where you got Amazon doing deals on, Thursday Night Football, and Walmart doing deals with Disney Plus, and, all these brands coming together to, capture us when we're in the moment of being entertained. What's going on in that space that is creative commerce?
Well, it's funny. I think especially in the TV type of moments, it makes so much sense to be enabling this with commerce, because I mean, we've been talking for years and years about co-viewing, or we are, we all have our phones while we're watching television. Like those behaviors have been happening for a long time. So why wouldn't we make it easier when you're watching, something on television to be able to like connect those things? I know in Amazon, they're doing something Amazon Live, more like shoppable live stream content. You have Samsung, they're doing more like AI powered shoppable content and where like viewers are connecting their mobile devices so they can shop really easily without even pausing the content. So I think this intersection, it makes sense, especially since everyone is already sitting there on their phones, probably shopping anyways. So in terms of like behavior, I think it's super smart that we're starting to make those, make those connection points. The other area where we're seeing content be even more commerce enabled is in the creator space. We're seeing a ton of growth in affiliate marketing, which is sort of like what's old again is new again. And that doesn't sound like a very, exciting thing. But I was talking to one partner and they said some of these creators are making $50,000 a month just on affiliate. Like they're doing really, really well. And you work with some of these smaller mid-tier creators that have really, really good followings, really different communities where you can drive sales for your brand in a way that is combining, more brand type content with this commerce enablement. So I think we're going to continue to see every piece of content that we put out there at least enabled for commerce.
Do you think that's where the innovation is going to happen most?
I would say one of the innovative moments within this that, I mean, we've talked a lot about the leading up to the sale and the way that we enable marketing and content and media and technology to work together leading into the sale. But on the back side of it, there's a lot of opportunity, in the ownership phase. And one of the campaigns that we were able to look at, one of the examples that we found in part of this research, is a sampling campaign for ice cream in Mexico with a brand called Elena's. And what Elena's was aiming to do was to sample the 5 main flavors of ice cream that are their some representing their best sellers, others representing opportunity areas for growth. And so a sampling strategy can be a really simple thing, right? It used to be that you'd stand up an event on site at a retailer, a grocery store, or whatnot, and simply provide samples so that customers could taste and experience this. Well, they took an approach here where they did use marketing on the front end, and created a campaign that was tied to the football league in Mexico, and the 5 flavors represented the 5 stages of grief. And so when their favorite team would lose, they would, here would be this brand that would have the ability to kind of, take them through the 5 stages of grief, from anger all the way through to, to acceptance with each flavor and each layer in this pint of ice cream. And so while it was a great idea and they tied the brand to a really popular sport and, popular teams, in the marketing phase leading up to the purchase, they delivered this really cool experience on the back end of it, post-purchase, that connects back to the brand and back to the game and back to the sport, and really, creates this endearment, I think, with customers that leads to repurchase. And I think that's an innovative, in this instance, it's sampling and it's very physical. In other instances, it's maybe a little bit more data driven, and the signals coming back post-purchase are so much more powerful and so much more valuable because of the input that they provide you on what customers are looking for and how to deepen those relationships, which really gets us into lifetime customer value, which has a profound opportunity for innovation. But at the end of the day, it requires marketers and agencies that are thinking more integrated, more connected, more holistically, and are making good use of the data. One of the things that we pointed to in the research was that it's creative commerce, and there's creativity, and there are ideas and brand ideas that are represented in this, but it is not the same old creativity. It's not Madison Avenue creativity. Don Draper got a calculator, and knows how to crunch numbers and knows how to use data. And you see that at play in this strategy, whether it's the marketing on the front end or the CRM and the loyalty and the purchase, the post purchase on the back end.
You guys are kind of circling around some of the things in creative commerce that maybe only big brands could do, but then this whole other tier that's being opened up. And I'll explain that by saying it's like when I think about the marriage between streaming platforms and marketplaces, that still seems like a big brand execution and a little bit more traditional creativity as we've known it. But then, Kelsey, you were talking about, social advertising, and we didn't even get to retail media. Like that seems like a place to play, a creative commerce space that almost any brand can play in. What's the opportunity there?
Yeah. I mean, D2C drove that, right? Like D2C brands weren't huge brands. And they're, in a lot of ways, I think, drove this convergence between brand and commerce because they saw the transaction gap close. And, especially during the pandemic, you have people who are forced to figure out how to shop online. You're scrolling through Instagram, you see a product, you're learning about this brand for the first time. You're maybe sharing it with a friend and you're purchasing it. Like that's almost every piece of the customer life cycle that you can participate in. So I don't think it's just a big brand opportunity, particularly in social media. With creators, there's a ton of opportunity to work with these types of work in these types of environments, regardless of your size.
We've been talking about this pretty holistically, but are we almost in that time where a big brand can have their own marketplace, but then also connect to these retail media marketplaces and close the gap between their campaigns and their own platforms and their inventory? Can all this stuff be connected yet?
Theoretically, yes. The systems are there. The maturity of data lakes and DMPs and clean room technology to match third party with first party CRM. We talked about transactional data on one side, supply chain data on another side. Like all of that exists, but at the moment, just like the purchase experience, they too exist somewhat in isolation. And it becomes really an enterprise, technology architecture exercise to pull together the systems so that the teams can have the visibility across the different areas to be able to execute in the way that you're suggesting. It is a nirvana for marketing for sure, and businesses and e-commerce teams. But right now they're a bit siloed, in their areas. And so as much as there needs to be a architecture of an enterprise architecture of technology play within this, there's also an internal alignment that needs to happen across sales and tech and marketing and e-com and CX. And and I understand that, as the moment I say that every single one of our clients that are listening to this are going, oh God, we're talking, like a raging complicated level of alignment. No, not really. It's not about a reorg. It's not about collapsing silos. It's just about collaboration across those teams, and collaborating to be able to move the data and the insights from team to team, and to execute in a little bit more harmony. And we saw a really killer example of this in the research where Verizon Business, they were very, their lead gen team inside Verizon Business was seeing all types of inbounds from all different channels, maybe chat or online or the call center or whatnot. And the business units were basically competing for those leads, regardless of the profitability of the lead necessarily. And so what they found was that once they organized their objectives and aligned their objective around profitable customers, irregardless of channel, that they were able to stop the business units necessarily competing, and kind of work together and collaborate together to be able to identify the high value targets, the more profitable customers, and serve their needs no matter what channel. And once they all kind of had that one aligned goal, it seemed to fall into place for them to do that. So the tech alignment and some sort of organizational alignment becomes a really important piece to be able to deliver this experience beyond the partnerships or any of the tech innovation that Kelsey was talking about before.
And what you said was so critical, Jay, is that it's alignment around the customer and around that high value customer. This year, during our 2023 marketing survey, we talked to B2C decision makers, and we actually saw the top 3 things that they cared about most in North America. The first was engagement across the customer lifecycle. The second was brand perception, and the third was improving their customer experience. But all 3 of those it wasn't ROI, it wasn't efficiency, it was customer. The top 3 things were all about the customer. So I do think there is a reckoning and understanding from brands this year that being more customer centric and building your strategy around the customer is so critical.
I appreciate these explanations. And Jay, the root of my question earlier about the technology was important, because I want the listeners to actually understand that creative commerce is a strategy, but it's also an opportunity to, implement and orchestrate a series of systems and platforms and data. They're, one is more obtainable than the other for some brands. So, I didn't want the creative commerce to fall flat and know that one's mutually exclusive of the other, that, you can't have a creative commerce experience unless you connect everything.
I don't think that's necessarily the case, especially when you think about where we're starting with this kind of purchase vacuum of very isolated, optimized purchase experiences. Just connecting some of it creates a better experience, and we understand obviously change can't happen overnight, and that it probably makes sense for companies to start experimenting with fewer channels to figure this out, and then roll it out to more channels once success has been determined. One of the principles that we had uncovered in this research that I think is really important for our clients and our listeners is this concept of function first investments. And what's meant by function first investments is we're not talking about radical reorganizational changes that require change management structures and consultants and years to accomplish. We're talking about relatively feasible, manageable, bite-sized, if you will, advancements. So a test market is a perfect example of that. Identifying a few channels that you can create a more fluid experience, testing it and seeing what your results are, and then expanding from there.
This was a great conversation, guys, but I want to make sure that we get to the heart of what this really is. Creative commerce isn't this aspirational thing. It connects directly back to some recent research that we put out there in a podcast we just published with Melissa Parrish about the customer obsessed growth engine, which really comes down to alignment. So if we could just sum up what creative commerce is and what it isn't, but really get to the heart that this is a business strategy.
Yes, I can start and tell you that creative commerce it's an engagement strategy that is designed to align channels and content and moments so that you can deliver what customers are looking for along the path of purchase that they take. And that path may be, multi-channel and multivariate, but you're organizing, data and content and media and messages and marketing to be able to implement.
Yeah, and I would add in terms of building a strategy for now, during peak pandemic, customers were much more forgiving of customer experiences, but that's changed. When we talked to customers in 2023, we found that 63% actually expect a better customer services than they have in the past. So brands need to, fix their potholes, and they need to activate like a brand experience in a way that does deliver value. And when we talk about the customer growth engine, it's about not having short-term thinking and not thinking about just extracting value from customers. That's going to fail in this new type of world. You have to have an engine that's about growing revenue, profit, customer retention, and doing all of that consistently and bringing your teams together to do that. So, we saw in our research when teams do bring those things together and they do deploy a customer obsessed growth engine, they grow revenue faster, they have 2 times higher profit, and they're doing that all faster than their peers. So it's super important to think about how you activate your brand experience in this new context, and how you align all of your functions together around maximizing customer value.
So clearly brands cannot do this all alone. If a brand is bought into this approach, what kind of partners, whether they be DX partners, commerce partners, or media partners, where does a brand go to get this kicked off?
I mean, I can start. I think you start by talking to your agency. If they're really managing the full experience for you, you talk to them about where are those opportunities we're missing out on across our media plan. Are there opportunities for us to enable the content to be more commerce forward? And you start there, and you start looking at points in your plan where you might be able to sort of up commerce your ideas.
Yeah, and their ability to integrate, I think, is a crucial piece of this, because I think what we've talked about is it's not any one thing; it's several things acting in concert, and in singing a bit more harmoniously, and so having partners that can help, tune the instruments, so to speak, and play along in harmony with you, is important. So integrating channels, activating data, understanding the customer journey, and and helping to prioritize, what messages, what content, when to get content and messages out of the way when they're purchasing, and then how to bring content back into play on the back end of it. That type of integration and sophistication in a partner is important for this execution.
All right, great conversation for such a deep emerging topic that we're going to take on at CX North America. I want to thank you both, and I can't wait to hear more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you like what you heard today, please join us at CX North America, where you can dive even deeper into a variety of customer experience topics. At CX North America on June 13th through 15th, you'll get the latest research from dozens of Forrester analysts, network with your peers, and walk away with actionable insights and best practices. Learn more at forr.com/CX23. That's forr.com/CX23. Thanks for listening.